Section 2, The Being of God, Chapter 5, The Existential Argument for the Existence of God, the Uncomposed Composer. God is the sublime simple being, the uncomposed composer. Author: I felt in my bones that this universe does not explain itself. C.S. Lewis, cited in Fundamentals of the Faith by Peter Kreeft. Many confusions in the doctrine of God and many apologetic weaknesses could be avoided if God were understood first of all as being itself or as the ground of being. Cornelius Van Til, reviews existential absoluteness alone can ground all existential contingency and becoming. James E. de La Salle, God without parts being, essence, and existence. The ancient pre-Socratic philosopher, Parmenides 490 BC once said, whatever is, is. 145. What would at first seem like an obvious proposition is one of the most basic principles of reality. This is what is known as the law of identity. B is B. The law of identity is an undeniable and self-evident truth. It asserts that each thing is what it is and is not another thing. Concerning this principle, Aristotle stated that a thing is itself, and to ask why a thing is itself is just a meaningless inquiry. 146. The meaningless character of this inquiry is rooted in the self-evident nature of the law of identity. A statement is self-evident if the predicate is reducible to the subject, as in, I am myself. Once the terms are understood, it is evident that the statement is true and corresponds to reality. The themist scholar, Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange states, that which is and cannot simultaneously not be. 147. The added negation in the preceding proposition is a declaration of the law of non-contradiction. B is not tilde B. It is another undeniable and self-evident truth. It states that something cannot be and not be at the same time and in the same way. To be or not to be, may be the question, as expressed by Shakespeare, but the answer will never be, being is and being is not, at the same time and in the same way. To be is to exist, to be an individual, a primary substance. To be is to have being and to be an existent being. Whatever is real and has real existence. That which is has real being, and to not be is simply non-being. It is nothingness. Nothingness, as Jonathan Edwards quipped, is what sleeping rocks dream of. The laws of identity and non-contradiction are foundational for the discovery of truth and the knowledge of reality. The law of identity, B, is the affirmative statement about reality, and the law of non-contradiction, B is not tilde B, is the negative statement concerning reality, which is existence itself. Being is, B is. That something is the greatest self-evident and undeniable existential affirmation that can be made. Its denial is impossible because someone must be in order to deny anything, especially their own existence. It forces the discussion of reality into the realm of being. Why is there something rather than nothing? Nothingness cannot be discussed, defined, or imagined. All the questions of reality and reality itself must start with the gratuitous nature of existence. Whatever is, and is not another, will inexorably lead to the one who is, absolute necessary being, ens necessarium, one who is pure actuality, actus purus, and one who is subsistent being itself, ipsum is subsistens. Whatever is, the first step, necessarily depends on and leads us to the one who is, the last step in the analogy of being. 148. For without single quote the1 who is there could never be being, whatever is. Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange writes, if we maintain the absolute necessity of this principle, identity, we find that the supreme reality is identified with being as A is identified with A. The supreme reality then, is not becoming, is not creative evolution, but is being itself, ipsum is, ever identical with itself, in whom alone is essence, essentia, identified with existence, is. 149. The concept of being refers to what a thing is and that a thing is. What a thing is, essence, and that a thing is, existence, are distinct in creatures and things, but are identical in God. This is to say, that there is no distinction between the essence and existence of God. God's essence is existence, or God essentially of his essence exists. The questions what is God and is God, does God exist, are answered in the same manner, he is. This profound truth was presupposed and served as the backdrop of God's self-revelation to Moses. The philosophical underpinnings of God's self-explanation are too significant to ignore. God revealed himself to Moses as, I am that I am, Exodus 3:14. God revealed himself as the very ground of being. This means that God is existence or being himself, pure life and pure existence. He is the ground of being, the reason for all existent being. All things merely share in being. All that is, only has being by participation is commune. They only partake or receive being, which is essentially possessed by God. It is also very important to say that God is not the superlative of our kind of being, even though we call him the greatest conceivable being. The being of God must be understood analogically. God is not the highest existent within this commune, but God is being essentially and primarily, while creatures only have being in a derived or secondary sense. 150. God does not share in being. He transcends and is the ground of all existent being. God is subsisting being itself. He is absolute, transcendent, and the only ground and reason for contingent existence. For from him and through him and to him are all things, Romans 11:36, is. God is the source, from him, the means, through him, and the goal, to him, of all that exists. It is in God that we live and move and have our being, Acts 17:28, is. As such, God is subsistent being itself, ipsumis subsistens, and pure actuality, actus purus. James de Lasalle explains, the conception of God as actus purus and ipsumis subsistens effectually places God beyond the creaturely mode and order of being, thus upholding his absolute transcendence, while at the same time explaining how such a creaturely order could possibly come to be in the first place. Existential absoluteness alone can ground all existential contingency and becoming. 151. God, as pure act and subsisting being, is simple, and therefore, is not composite, made of parts in any way. He is the ground of all being and the sufficient reason for all that is. As pure act, God has no potency at all. This will be developed later. The concept of being is foundational. As such, it is also the principle of language. The idea of being permeates our everyday communications. Without the concept of being, predication would be impossible. Our indispensable two-letter verb, is, 152, can function as a simple copula, or it can be used to make existential affirmations concerning things, concepts, and truths. See Table 9. Even our language reflects the fundamental truth that be is, something exists. Our grammar, sentences, communication, and even the understanding of ourselves are constructed around the forms of the verb to be. Phrases like I am, it is, we are, we were, I was, and it will be all have their root in the concept of being. Our self-designations are encapsulated in the notion of being. We are human beings because we have being. As we make predications of things, the notion of being is reflected in our language. But what makes something have being, or makes something a something? What makes an individual or primary substance a real being? What is an individual to whom predications can be made? Individual beings are compositions of essence and existence. For example, the essence, essentia, of humanness must be instantiated by means of an act of being, is, in order for that individual to be. This is also act of existence is the very act of the potency of that individual's essence, that is, humanness. This act of being is limited by the essence that has instantiated. 153. The potency of a human essence must be actualized in order for a human being to exist. This is the metaphysical act of composition, which must take place for any individual or thing to ever exist. There cannot be an infinite regress in the composition of essence and existence, and therefore, this regress must end or start in one who is pure act and subsisting being. For example, in order for Adam, an individual substance, to exist he must have existence, actus essendioris 154, added to humanness essentia by an efficient cause. 155. Richard Muller writes, any given individual must have essentia. And is, the act of existing. A human being must have both humanity, the human essentia, and actual existence, is. Actual existence without essentia is nonsense and unidentifiability, while the essentia of humanity without the act of existence or actual existence, is a mere concept. 156. Adam, then, is a being by participation through the efficient causation of the one who is being itself. As all things are wet by participation in water, so all that exists by participation. 157. In single quote pt.1 who is as their first efficient cause and subsisting being. The nature of participated, and therefore, contingent being necessitates that it is gratuitous, a gift of single quote pt.1 who is. This is the only rational conclusion, since the first cause is not only personal but is also infinite goodness. The good may be diffusive of itself, 158, but the one who is infinite goodness acts gratuitously by will and not by obligation or necessity. Infinite, perfect goodness must be intentionally and volitionally beneficent. Obligatory goodness is an imperfect notion. Therefore, all being is gratuitous. By participation in essential being. Therefore, the individual human atom is dependently existent by virtue of participation in the first cause, and his being is the result of beneficent subsisting being. Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange writes, all beings by participation depend on the being by essence as on their supreme cause. That which is being by participation is not its own existence, since we must distinguish the subject which participates from the existence which it receives and participates. Adam is not his existence, but has his existence, received from him who alone can say, I am he who is, I am existence itself. 159. The one who is existence itself is the God of Scripture, Exodus 3:14. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, Revelation 22:13, Comfort, Isaiah 44:6, 48:12, Revelation 1:11-17, NKJV. There is no other besides the God of Scripture who reveals himself as the ground of all being. For anything to ever exist, for there to be being identical to itself, there must needs be one whose essence is identical with existence, full and perfect being. There must be one who essentially exists, is essential being. The one who essentially exists is subsisting self-existent being, which is pure actuality. He is I am, or the one who is, who was and who is to come. Comfort, Revelation 1:8. Joseph Pohl writes, only an uncreated, self-existent being can be called being in the full and perfect sense of the term. All nations are before him as if they had no being at all, and are counted to him as nothing and vanity, Isaiah 40:17. Tertullian develops this idea briefly and beautifully as follows, God is unique, and he is unique because he is soul, and he is soul for the reason that nothing coexists with him. Thus he is also the first, because all other beings come after him, and the reason they come after him is that they are of him, and they are of him, because they are created out of nothing. 106.